Well, hello everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. Just want to say thank you for joining our session today. I'm Scott Fiuschetti from Geopath. And, if you've been tracking our newsletters and blogs, and you know that there's been a lot going on, and especially with this recent March 8th release. And we wanted to make sure we were doing, having some webinars to really help our members, understand all the, number of updates to the data that went out and the improvements to the Insight Suite that occurred over the weekend. And today is the first of two webinars that we'll be doing to help everyone understand and track with what's going on. On Monday, I'll start with that one first. We're going to be talking through the Insight Suite so you can see all the new updates there, how you can access 2021 data, et cetera. We'll be talking about that. I'll show you what we're going to be covering more specifically at the end of this session. But today, we're going to be talking about the updates and the improved reach and frequency model. And with me today, you know him, you love him, you can't measure out a home without him. Told him I was going to say that. Dylan Maven. I just want to welcome him and thank him for joining us today.
Thanks, Scott.
I had to say it. I don't know. It makes me laugh. Anyway, just want to cover the agenda for today. So we want to take a few steps back before we talk about the reach and frequency model. So I know we did a session in January where we talked about the 2021 annual forecast, but we thought it'd be good to revisit that for two reasons. One, for those of you who weren't able to join that session, it helps set a good groundwork. And two, that groundwork really helps inform what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the reach and frequency and how those changes in travel patterns have impacted the need to update our reach and frequency model. And then we'll finish up with a review of the 2021 forecast rollout schedule for the next couple of months. So again, make sure everybody's aware of what's coming and what to expect. And then we'll answer any questions as we can. Please put your answers in the Q&A widget. Sometimes if you put them in the chat, they might get lost with a lot of the other chat going on. So if you can remember just to put them in the Q&A, that'd be great. And what we'll do is we'll collect all the questions. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So we'll try to save them till the end. So because there's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about and want to make sure we're able to talk about it holistically and then kind of parse out any questions that may come. And one note with the questions, specifically when we're talking about something like reach and frequency is very sensitive to the inventory and the market. So we'll try our best to answer questions, but if they're so specific, we may not be able to answer them right online today, and would ask that you email those to Geek Out. But we'll do our best, and we'll see what types of questions we get. Just wanted to make that caveat up front. So one other bit of background, and I know I showed this slide back in January, but I also think it's really helpful as we start to kind of lay the groundwork for the session today. So typically, right, traditionally, what Geopath produces is a forecasting metric, right? We have an annual impression number that we produce annually that is core to what we do. And to get there, we've used traffic patterns, right? And you use that, and it's proved as a stable forecasting method for predicting impressions, right? But that all changed in March of 2020, right? And the question, I guess, becomes like, okay, what happens with the 2021 annual forecast? How do you account for these changes? And to do that, to really understand and create a responsible forecast, it's really important for us to understand, not only where we were, right, with the past travel trends, we need to understand at that time kind of where we are to understand where we're going, right? And that's really important as we start to think about how we were looking to create the 2020 annual forecast and how do we account for the impact of COVID, and ultimately, how movement has shifted within each market, which again really impacts the reach and frequency. So first, let's start by talking about travel trends and understanding the different travel trends in the market. So as I was kind of hinting at in the last couple of slides, prior to March of 2020, traffic volume had been really steadily increasing over the past 8 years. You can see on the chart on the left, there's variation, but the overall pattern is a pattern upward over the last 8 years. But then as you get to March, obviously you see this big decrease, and the recovery started to happen. So just based on this chart, we can safely say that 2021 will not be like pre-COVID years. That said, traffic patterns they do differ across the country, right, in different areas. So on the right side, there's an example of rural highways. You see they went through, there's that dip in April and then the climb, but similar to the urban highways on the left, similar dip. But as you start to see the recovery, it's much further away from pre-COVID levels than you see on the right side with some rural areas. So again, not all areas were impacted equally, and not all are recovering at the same rate, which is important to note as we look at how we craft the 2021 forecast. So this looks at what a typical year used to look like, right? So average daily trips, you can see in January it climbs up and you get through the middle of the year at the height, and then it dips off through the fall and winter months. Pretty typical, pretty standard. With COVID, you can see in the beginning of last year, I don't know if you recall, it feels like forever ago, but it was a mild winter. You see the daily trips tracking a little bit above average, but then ultimately, again, COVID hit, travel restrictions got put into place, and we see that dip and then the ultimate recovery from that. So that really helps, hopefully, to set the stage of what does that mean for what does recovery look like, how do we anticipate, and how do we account for that in our 2021 forecast. I do want to pause. I know I've been talking a lot. Dylan, is there anything you'd want to add or add to what I've been saying to any of this?
No, I mean, we do have a little bit more updated data, which you'll see in one of the charts later on in this deck. And then same with the Federal Highway Administration, their reports, two more reports have come out since that one. So they have the data through December. And what you're seeing, if you wouldn't mind going back up to those two charts, I just want to reiterate that the sort of offset or the delta from August, September, and October has remained the same and is now tracking with November and December, but remaining at that same offset. So it's still about 90% below pre-COVID levels, 10% below, so 90% of pre-COVID volume across the country. So I don't know, I just wanted to reiterate that because I think that's important, because that's basically where we are starting off 2021 at that same offset, and that's at the core of our forecast for the year.
Right. And I think that's a nice segue into, I think, this slide, right? And how we're starting to anticipate recovery, and how does that play into our 2021 annual forecast. And I think one of the common questions we get into Geek Out and just among our members is, do our 2021 impressions count for COVID? And the answer is yes, right? And to this point here, you can see the blue line, which is the pre-COVID monthly average. And as Dylan was saying, the delta we saw at the end of last year is tracking into the early. We're anticipating and had anticipated with the way we built the forecast that would continue through the mid part of the year, where the actual recovery would start to begin. And again, this takes into account the travel trends we are seeing, as well as other things such as expected vaccination rates around the country, et cetera. And we start to see the recovery take shape and start to, the delta gets smaller throughout the remaining part of the year and even into 2022. That said, similar to some of the earlier charts, not some markets will have a greater, slower recovery than others. This is obviously San Francisco, and you can see the delta is pretty wide, and they don't even reach pre-pandemic levels through the end of this year. But in smaller areas such as Asheville, North Carolina, or in the next slide, Boise, you can see the delta is much smaller, and it's tracking really tightly against the pre-COVID levels and getting much closer through the end of the year. Again, Dylan, anything you'd want to add to these couple of slides? Any other comments
No,
there?
I think that was great. Thanks.
Okay, cool. So that brings us to what we really want to talk about more of today is the reach and frequency and the improved precision within. I'll hand that off to Dylan, and he'll talk more specifically about all of that.
Great, thank you, Scott. As we had done last year and building the forecast for 2021, it was really only enabled because of our access to device level mobile location data to understand the travel patterns and the travel activity and the presence of the population in different areas. And so we needed to update our methods to account for these drastic changes due to COVID. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is, in addition to the trip volumes changing, the types of trips that people are taking and the frequency of those trips has dramatically changed as well. And so that's been one of the reasons why it had taken a bit of time to re-architect how that information goes into the reporting of audience in our forecast to not only deliver the total number of persons, but the reach and frequency of the respective markets over time. So all these things have been improved because of these new learnings and these new data sets, and we'll talk about some of those changes. And in addition to a more precise and a more accurate reach and frequency model, we're also expanding this out to be able to report 52-week reach and frequency. So a couple other additional benefits in all of this overhauling. And like I just said, all of this is enabled because of access to mobile location data, understanding for the full population, where are people spending their time, and then how are they moving? And then how is that different versus other periods? And so this heat map that you see on the bottom right is showing changes in population time spent. So the major metropolitan areas have seen a big decrease in the business districts, but those persons didn't just disappear. They're spending time now at home, or they're spending time in their local communities trying to be safe through all this. So everyone's patterns have changed. Instead of going to work perhaps and picking up something from the grocery store on the way home, now you may be working from home and going to curbside pickup or something like that. And it's very different all across the country. The makeup of each community has their own inherent travel patterns, and we're able to pick that up now and account for that as we're improving our methods and reporting the audience delivery. Now, if you live in New York, often one of the stories is about how, or if you speak to anyone that's in New York and they're in Midtown, very different pattern right now. People have said it's a little bit more similar to a slow Sunday in Midtown Manhattan versus pre-COVID years. But if you are in some of the more dense residential neighborhoods in New York, you're still seeing a fair amount of activity. Actually, probably more people that are there than normal because they're at home. And so this is something that we're seeing across the country in all different types of markets. Chicago, similar, Houston, sort of this reduction in activity in the city center, but increases in the periphery. So long story short, as Scott said, the trip volume, and these charts are updated from the Federal Highway Administration. So you can see that the number of trips, or the trip volume, pre-COVID versus 2020 is less. And so we know that the trip volumes have decreased, but in addition to that, the trip frequency has decreased. And so we've been able to observe this by looking at a subset of the mobile location data that we have access to be able to see over longer periods of time how often the same device travels in the same direction down the same roadway. And so if you go to the next chart, you can see, oh, sorry, so we'll focus on Los Angeles here. So Los Angeles was a market that was heavily impacted by COVID, as you can see, starting in 2020, starting in what, week 10, week 11, when a lot of the country started putting travel restrictions in place. The number of daily trips week over week over week dropped dramatically in March and April, and then regained some ground, but has sort of remained a little bit of an offset versus the seasonal trends. And even starting off this year, sort of picking up where we left off last year, we're seeing that mimic the seasonality, but it's still at a decreased rate of travel. And so when we were looking at the trip frequency in Los Angeles, if you can go to the next slide, you're also going to see that trip frequency is down versus pre-COVID years. So the way that we are able to calculate this, we're looking at the total number of unique devices traveling over a particular roadway over time versus the total number of trips of those unique devices. And so what you're seeing here on day one, which would be a Monday in this case, average trip frequency of 1.2 in pre-COVID period, September 2019, about 1.5. And over the course of a week, you're picking up new people that are going there for the first time, but you're increasing your frequency because the same individuals are going to be going over the same roadways multiple times. And then Saturday and Sunday, you're getting a bunch of new people for the first time that are on those roadways. So on average, we're going, and again, this is just going to be applicable for the Los Angeles example. So this doesn't account for anywhere else, but we went from 2.2 exposures per week versus 1.6 in September of 2020. So a decrease in trip volume, decrease in trip frequency as well. So what's this mean for reach and frequency? Well, it means that if our total volume goes down, or our TRPs go down, and our frequency goes down, TRPs are equal to reach times frequency, it means that we may be maintaining the same reach levels or thereabout, looking at pre-COVID periods. One of the other things that we had done was looking at trip frequencies across the entire country, of course, to look at regional differences. And when we're looking at the average frequency of exposure, again, same methods, looking at the number of unique devices versus the number of trips of those unique devices on roadways over an extended period of time, we can see how unique or average frequency grows over time. And you can see those weekends in there on days 6 and 7, days 13 and 14, and so on. But average frequency grows over time, but you're always going to get a handful of new people, but each unique unit has this pattern to it. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. One of the big differences also that we are now able to implement in the new reach and frequency model is that the observed data coming from the mobile devices is very different from the self-reported information that we had received from travel surveys in years past. And it was those self-reported travel surveys that were the foundation of the existing reach and frequency models that Geopath and formerly TAB had implemented in our metrics. And if anybody has ever worked with observed versus self-reported behavior and data capture, they're often very, very different. And we saw that here in this case as well. Now, not going to speculate as to why there was such a difference of the survey versus what is observed. Could be things based upon the types of individuals that were being interviewed, things of that nature, but much more confident, especially looking at hundreds of thousands of mobile devices traveling over time as to what the frequency of those trips are in the new data. So this is a much more empirically derived method. And so we're going to be seeing, even for markets that are not impacted by a reduction of trips, there is a reduction of trip frequency, just moving to what we now know to be the average trip frequency of devices, or the frequency of exposure on roadways to the audience itself. One of the other improvements that you'll see in this new reach and frequency model as you are exploring and putting information or putting packages together is that there's a unique sensitivity now that is going to be in there that is derived from the unique footprints of every single piece of inventory. And again, this is possible because of the understanding of the home location of the devices and whereabout the sort of the coverage of each unique asset, the physical coverage. And so these images actually are derived or come out of the Insight suite. This is looking at the, this is a heat map of 2 unique pieces of inventory on opposite sides of Atlanta, and the zip codes from which they gather circulation. And so each one has a unique physical coverage, geographical coverage of audience. And as you are combining pieces of inventory together, the reachable population of that cumulative reach frequency is going to increase. But one thing that you'll also notice is that there are certain places of the marketplace, or certain inventory types, or certain portfolios that do not have access to certain areas of the marketplace. And so what you're seeing now is, again, a much more sensitive reach ceiling that reflects the potential of out of home to deliver to the geographic areas and the populations in those areas based upon those paths and the home locations. So just to recap, go to the next slide. What are the takeaways here? So things that everyone should keep in mind as they're looking at the 2021 forecast and new reach frequency. 1, trip volume is going to be lower across the country. May not be very low in some areas, but some areas are going to be seeing a decrease in trip volume, traffic volume. So we're going to see lower TRPs per unit. These are sort of broad statements. Trip frequency is also going to be lower than pre-COVID based upon what we're observing from the mobile data. This is, forget the observed frequency versus the self-reported survey. So trip frequency is lower than pre-COVID, which means that combined with lower TRPs, reach may stay the same if the trip frequency is going down at the same rate as the TRP level. So you could potentially get, in some cases, get comparable reach as you would have in pre-COVID periods. However, because observed trip frequency is much lower than previously understood, we are going to see on a unit level an increase in reach and a reduction in frequency, and that's going to be sort of across the board. And then one of the other things that everyone should be able to observe is that the unique footprints of the individual units that are being put together in a package are going to help define a much more intuitive and much more sensitive reach and frequency for that unique package of inventory. So all these are good improvements to be more accurate and precise for what we're providing to our members.
Great. I think now
that's it from me, Scott.
Yeah, I think so. So we just want to pause before we move on to the next section, which is going to be an overview of the remaining couple of months with the rollout. Just a quick question that came in related to reach and frequency and the availability for place-based packages. So question as well, when will reach frequency be available for place-based packages in the workspace? And correct me if I'm wrong, but that would, you should be able to run that, correct? In workspace if the inventory is in there for 2021 metrics?
Correct. Yes, and we do have observed visitation frequency as well for place-based media. So same information that we're able to derive. And of course, a lot of visitation has changed due to COVID not being able to even go into some establishments or with limited visitation for dining and such. So yeah, the same observed inputs are being used for reach and frequency for place-based packages. Yes, so you'll be able to get the same information there.
Okay, great. Another question came up, which I think we would talk about in a little bit, but just wanted to address it here about the annual forecast, and if we would be revisiting that and potentially re-release the forecast and in mid-year, or what would we consider that?
Yes, we are keeping open the option of updating or releasing an updated forecast. We're not going to modify the existing forecast. What we will be doing, if we do it mid-year, is create a mid-year annual forecast that will be valid from July 2021 through June 2022. So still an average annual week, but reflecting the future 12 months. And yes, that will also take into account any changes in trip frequency and trip volumes.
Cool, and that's a nice segue. There was a question here about trip volume and trip frequency, just helping us understand that a little bit better. Like, what's the difference between trip volume and trip frequency?
Sure, so if you think of the total number of trips that people take on an average year, I'll use myself pre-COVID. I have a dog, and so I may take my dog for a walk in the morning and walk to the park and come back home. That's one trip. I then go to work, and on the way, I drop my child off at school and then go into the office. That's one trip or two trips if I spend a lot of time at the school as I'm dropping them off. And then I may go out to lunch, come back to work. That's another two trips, and then come home, picking children up on the way home. That's another two trips. And so that's the total number of trip volumes. Now the trip frequency is how many times is that same, am I taking the same trip or any trip in the same direction on the same roadway? And understanding that trip frequency of individuals passing units is how we then take the total circulation and the total impressions of individuals being exposed to out-of-home units and understand what the average frequency is of people being exposed to out-of-home assets.
Cool.
Hopefully that helps.
Yep. And there was a question, I'm not sure if Brian and AJ, who are also on this call helping us answer questions, maybe typed in an answer, but I do think it's worth talking about. Previously we had that limitation for 12-week reach and frequency. I just want to let everybody know and confirm, and I don't know if you want to add anything to this, Dylan, but we have expanded the capabilities of reach and frequency. So now you can run, campaigns up to 52 weeks for the year. And again,
correct. Yes.
One is, yeah, just wanted to confirm and make sure everybody's aware of that, and wanted to make sure we address that question just verbally here now as well. Let's see if there's any more coming in. I know there's a couple here that
I think one thing to reiterate is that the reach and frequency model is only being applied and only valid with the 2021 forecast. The 2020 data is not being updated, will not be updated with the new reach frequency model. That is as is.
Great. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to scan the questions quickly as well. I mean, I think most of them I feel like we've addressed. There's a couple that we probably would follow up with you directly, specifically on some of these, a couple of these questions here. And there's a couple that I know we're going to answer in the next couple of slides. So I'm going to jump to the next slide and feel free to keep asking questions as we go through the next couple of slides in case you're thinking of something, or maybe I didn't quite cover it, even though, even maybe I'm misinterpreting the question and I think I'm covering it, but we're not. So I do want to talk about some of the remaining things of what to expect through March and April. So in March, and if you've seen the recent, couple of recent newsletters and blog posts, we are expecting that the 2021 forecast, that becomes the currency of the industry, and that everybody should start adopting that on March 22nd. So that is, then with the next release, we had a March 8th release, and then with the March 22nd release, we want that to be, everybody to be using the 2021 forecast as the currency of the industry. Along with that, the impression variation dashboard 2.0 will be available in the Insights suite as well. And again, we've talked a little bit about that in some of our newsletters. And Dylan, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to tell everybody just quickly how the new dashboard differs from the old dashboard, and how it's improved over time?
Sure thing. Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to make sure was reflective, and this goes back to some of the earlier charts showing the seasonality month by month across the year. Because of our annual forecast, our annual metric that we provide is an average annualized week. It's one flat line across the entire year. But we know that there are seasonal variations inherent in the in each piece of inventory. Each market has its own unique patterns, and so when we're going to be providing the impression variation report, the variation is not against that specific week, against the annual average. It will be against the observed week, against the expected monthly delivery. So it's more or less of how well is the audience delivery pacing with the expected seasonality of the annual forecast, as opposed to what's the percentage difference of this week versus the annual average.
Great, cool. And then the additional audiences, we realize there's core audiences right now, but additional audiences, your basic demographic audiences with previously available combinations. So think about your ADS audiences. Those will be available in the API in the Insight Suite on March 29th. And then throughout the remaining part of April, we'll be releasing audiences incrementally into the API and the Insight Suite. So some of those other behavioral audiences that you are able to get in the 2021 2020 data rather. But also of note, the legacy tools, so ADS and O-Plan, again, we've announced this a couple of times, but I want to make sure people aren't caught off guard, will be decommissioned on April 1st, as well as TabView Online. So in terms of ADS and O-Plan, we recommend that you start adopting the Insight Suite, and we're happy to set up a training session with you and your team to do a custom training. There's also the Learning Lab and the Geek Out Library, which also have training modules in them, so you can start to become aware and just understand overall the Insight Suite itself. But like I said, we're happy to reach out and have you reach out, and we can set up a custom training for you as well. In terms of TabView Online, you can continue to submit inventory through our submission Excel sheet and submit that and work with your analyst to do that as well. And as Dylan noted, and we kind of asked the question earlier, and there's been a couple other questions similar to this about the the 2021 forecast, and will we reissue, and how often we'll be checking in on it. And again, we will continue to monitor activity throughout the year and, reissue an update if we find it, that our forecast significantly deviates from the observed data that we are seeing. And we would definitely make sure our members know, and we would be, communicating that out as widely as we can. Also, there's been a couple questions about transit and fleet. And again, the 2021 transit forecast, again, which includes scheduled fleet and station media, are, will be released pending committee review and approval. So we're working with some of our internal committees on that and trying to get that out as fast as possible. I do want to, I know questions have been coming in. Brian, AJ, if you all want to jump in, is there anything that we might not have gotten to that I didn't miss, that I might have missed as things have gone, as we've been chatting here? Sorry, I'm not hearing anything. So I think, I feel like we've tried to cover as many questions, different questions as possible. I just want to do a quick scan and see if there's anything else. Otherwise, if we did miss, yeah, if we're, sorry if I've missed something, and we definitely will have a list of these questions and can reach out to you all individually if we didn't quite get your question answered. Okay, I feel like I will, yeah, I feel like we've answered as many of these kind of online as we could. So we'll, like I said, we'll reach out directly if we didn't get to your question here today. I do want to let everybody know that we do, and I know I mentioned it up front, we have a second session on Monday where we're going to walk through some of the changes in the Insight Suite. So show you how you can access the 2021 data. We released a new workflow into the workspace module. So hopefully people have started using that and are liking that, but we also wanted to do a session to show you how to use it, where to access the data, how you can access that new workflow, and get prepared for that to be the primary workflow in the workspace. And then we also wanted to show you the data, the new data available in the mobility dashboard. And this webinar, as well as any of our others, you'll be able to get at our out-of-home office hours, as well as on our YouTube channel. So I do want to say thank you. And again, please reach out to us at geekout@geopath.org if you think of a question afterwards, or if we didn't quite answer your question fully here. Happy to do it, to respond to you there. And also we will, like I said, if we didn't quite get to your questions, we'll look through the list and try to reach out directly to help anybody with any other questions that we didn't get to answer. So I just want to say thank you again, and thank you, Dylan. I appreciate you talking through all this with us today, and have a great rest of your Friday, everyone. Great. Thank you.